Hey everybody, it's Joel Howe, and this is part 2 of our 3D text tutorial. Let's see, today, or in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm hoping to, we had previously done the storyboard sketch here. We're going to show a logo, basically kind of move up in the screen and appear out of nowhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to use 3ds Max to create a text-based logo and slice that 3D text, and we'll do a few tricks in terms of wire parameters, so that it's a very convenient technique to use for slicing text. And that text 3D text model with the slice modifier should give us the effect we're looking for, and then next time we'll bring that into After Effects for the final look. So I'm going to close out Photoshop because we don't need that anymore, and I've got a new empty scene in 3ds Max, and I'm just going to work in the perspective view here, and we'll start by going to the create shapes, and we'll use the text element here. I'm going to write, we'll just use the word logo because we're not going to tie this to anybody. Typically, I'm sure you'd have a font that you'd need to specify here, but typically you would choose a font that's pretty thick in terms of the strokes on the letters. Arial Black seems to work pretty well. There's many more, but we'll use Arial Black for now. So typically when creating 3D text, one of the things that happens is, of course, most people look to just hit the extrude, go to modify, and we'll go to extrude, and we'll extrude the text, and look, we're done. And while I agree that's 3D text and we're all set, I like to use the bevel modifier, so I'm going to delete that extrude modifier. So we're back to a 2D shape here, and I like to use the bevel modifier, and I'll just show, let's set a height of 1 and an outline of 1, and we'll start with a negative outline of -1. So let's see if we can show that. So you can see a bevel on the bottom for level 1. Let me add the other 2 levels here. Let's see, something like that, maybe 15 units tall, and another height here, 1, and we want to bevel this again, so -1. So now that looks right. So we start with a negative outline, which actually reduces the shape area by 1 unit everywhere, and then we have level 2. Level 1 grows it by the height and the width the same, so we have basically a 45-degree chamfer on the entire logo, and we can still control the height here, and we've got a nice we want to make it a little thicker text, we can, and we've got a nice bevel front and back. Why is that bevel important? I'm going to rotate this and just turn on my angle snaps and just rotate this up 90 degrees. I like to have the bevel on there because I think the edges here make the text easier to read, especially if you've got some nice lighting. You'll pick up more highlights that way, and I just think that the text just looks a little bit sharper. Okay, so use bevel, not extrude, and even if it's a really tiny beveled edge, I think you'll still get better results using bevel. And you can play with options in here like curved sides and things like that. So there's definitely some functionality there. So we've got I'm going to call this the text logo. So what we want to do now is we're going to animate this starting below the origin 000, and we'll have it animate up and appear. And so what I need to do though is I'm going to use the slice modifier to basically slice this. So slice, and you'll see, you can't really see the whole thing, but there's the slice. Expand out the slice modifier, choose the slice plane subobject, and I've still got my angle snap toggle turned on, so I can rotate this down 90 degrees and choose remove top, or in this case I want to remove the bottom. And so now I can use the move key, hotkey is W, and I can move that up and down and slice my logo text. So ideally, my plan is to, if I start the logo here and I move this up, and I move the overall logo text object up, then and I move the slice modifier down at the same amount, it's going to appear as if it's arising out of nowhere. And so that's the plan. Now, if I'm going to animate this, I want to choose. You can see my default in-outs here. I don't want to have to constrain myself to a linear animation. I want it to ease in and out of positioning. So that means that I can't. It's going to be really hard for me to use just straight keyframe animation to do this. So my plan is this. I want to use a little trick to do this. This is easy to do with scripting, but there's a really handy helper tool I wanted to show, and I think I can use that and wire parameters to get good results here. So if I start with, so we've got our, I'm just going to set the slice plane back to the 0, 0, 0 on the overall piece here, and go back and actually move the logo centered as well, so the object is positioned at the origin. And under Create Helpers, there's a nice little helper tool here called Expose Transform, Expose TM. And so just create a Expose Transform object, and you'll see it there. And if we go to Modify, I can say, okay, which node do I want to expose? And so I want to expose the text logo object. And so actually down here, you're going to see expose values for the text object logo. So if I start to move this around and I select the logo here, you'll see I increased as I moved this, it moved up to 31.46. If I move this down, it's 13.668. So this object really just says what's the transform of this other object and exposes it here, which is great because we can use these as part of our wire parameters element. So so now it doesn't matter where this is located in the scene, but I should be able to use wire parameters to connect my overall position of this text object and the slice plane, and I'm going to use a little math to do that. So if you're familiar with wire parameters, I'm going to bring up the just the whole dialog. So we won't. So we'll see the dialog here. We have the room to do it, and so you can see we don't have much in the scene. Here's our text logo object. Here's the modifiers for our text logo object. There's our slice modifier, and here's the slice plane sub object, and there's the position XYZ for the slice plane sub object. Now, when we brought this in, we rotated the slice plane sub object, so we're going to have to counter that. So now we've got the text over here, expose transform, and here's all those values that we had for our text logo here, and so there's the world position Z, and so that's this vertical position. So if I were to, I want to basically wire the overall position of this text in Z, and you might think it's the Z position of the slice plane, but if you remember, I rotated the slice plane, so I'm going to have to choose the Y position here, and so I basically am going to just click. I'm going to use the Z position of the overall object to control the Y position of the float here, and I'll set that a one-way connection, so it's driven by the overall transform here, and hit connect. And if you saw, the slice plane just moved, and so now we've got a situation where I can move this up and down, and you can see that the local positioning of the slice plane is being driven by the same number as the overall position of the logo itself. So we've used wire parameters to actually drive the position of the slice plane with the overall position of the text logo. And again, we're playing this a little different because we're locating the slice plane based on the local coordinate system of the object, but we're using that same value. So now, what I'm going to do as a trick is instead of having a direct relationship here between the world position Z of the overall text object and the Y position here, I'm going to type a minus value in here, basically multiply by -1, and hit update. And so now every time for any positioning that we do, now you get the desired effect here. It's going to be like the logo appears out of nowhere, and it's based on the fact that because we're at 0, 0, anytime we move the overall text level up, it's going to move the slice plane down the same amount of distance. So it's a nice little trick. It keeps us from having to do any scripting, and as long as the overall the slice plane is always going to be located there. So that's the trick. Basically, wire parameters. We set it up with a negative relationship, and so now the slice plane is positioned based on the negative value of the overall Z position of the logo, and that gives us basically our text logo growing from nothing. So in this case now, the only thing left to do is we've got some obvious issues here. So I like to put a cap holes modifier on there, so that once we've sliced it, we'll close that up so that our lighting will work pretty well, and so we get a nice growth, and we can go from there. So this is where we're at. I think we're done with the 3D portion of this in terms of this overall logo project. I think we can do everything else in After Effects. So I'm going to put a nice material on this and render out 100 frames of animation. We can set that animation up right now. Basically, just drag this down and turn on auto key and go to frame 100, and then just drag this up to the point where it stops slicing, and there's our animation. And we get some nice easing by default. We didn't have to stick with a linear solution there, and we're all set. So I'll render this out, and then we'll bring this into After Effects and take a look at finishing the look there. Thanks.